Our live stream is going to be a little bit different than our past 10 weeks, where we talked a lot about the development of the energy body, the chakras, Kundalini, the outer body. And we're going to go to another part of our teaching platform. We have two parts. One is where we're teaching the energy body work, the light body work, and the other is where we're teaching courses on body work, coming from Shiatsu, developing into something that we call Shintai. And today I wanted to focus on the origins of Shiatsu, because I find that a lot of people are practicing Shiatsu, and there's a lot of contemporary ideas about Shiatsu. But what's happened over the years is that some of the original ideas, techniques, have been lost in the westernization of Shiatsu. As it became westernized, more conceptual ideas, more anatomical, physiological ideas were incorporated into the practice. So the origins of the technique are rooted in home remedies. Now we're talking more about the life of ancient people, or people over the last centuries in Asia, Japan, China, Korea. And it was very common that people would practice what we call home remedies, where they would use herbs, different kinds of food combinations, and also different types of what we now call bodywork techniques in order to help a person heal themselves, to get better when they were sick. The other one is that there was usually a person in the village called the barefoot doctor. And so this was someone that was not medically trained or formally trained, but had a wealth of knowledge of these type of techniques and remedies. So the origin of these techniques that then became labeled as Shiatsu became organized in that way. Mostly in the 1950s and the 1960s, it became organized in the form of a therapy called Shiatsu. And there was a subcategory called Anpuku, where the person was focusing on treating the hara, or the abdomen. The practitioners of the home remedies and barefoot techniques were oftentimes referring to how it is when you interact with nature as their guideline for how to interact with a person in the treatment. So being in nature, sitting in nature, exercising in nature, or you could say communing with nature, was the way that these practitioners developed their understanding, particularly of how energy flows. And this was the most important thing in the original type of treatment, was to notice the energy of the person, or what we call qi. And the original diagnosis was just, does qi move or doesn't move? And if it doesn't move, make qi move. This was the diagnosis that I learned originally from my teachers. They weren't using complex or more specialized ideas about meridians, which meridian had more energy, less energy, which direction was the energy. And these things are all helpful and useful. But going back to the more basic and primitive level of the practice, then we find this idea of just observing the whole person, and then the feeling of, is the qi moving or not moving? If it's not moving, make it move. And also to notice if the energy or the qi of the person was missing, it was empty. And so how to gather energy, to bring energy in force to the whole body or to a particular area of the body. So treatment generally was seen first as a whole body phenomenon. And then within that, you could specialize by focusing in on different areas. And also there were different facial diagnosis techniques where you could diagnose specific organs. So it could get more specific, and you could work with the lungs or the heart or the digestive system, circulatory system, and focus in that way. And that brings us to also one of the most important mindsets of the original way of treating, which was that intention determines the results. What happens is what your intention guides throughout the treatment. So it was very different. It was much more energetic, much more based on the spirit of moving qi, and less on a conceptual diagnosis, what this does, what that does, but more just like a general global idea of how to approach the body. So this original diagnosis, which was very simple, the whole body, you can see is the person, a more energetic person, are they more empty, more fragile, more hardy, more vital. And these are all initial indications. Even when you talk to the person, you can tell from their voice. Is their voice have more vitality or is it weak? If you go further, you could also hear the influence of an overactive or underactive organ, like the influence of the kidneys. So if the kidneys were weak, you can hear like a gargling sound in the voice. If the liver has excess energy stuck, then the person's voice would be like a booming voice, loud, very dense type of voice. So these are all indications and ways that would guide the treatment initially. Recently, we've been focusing on this idea of the techniques of the masters because it seems like that part was almost deleted or lost. People use some of the techniques here and there, but overwhelmingly the treatment has become dominated by specific diagnostics and more conceptual approach to how you should treat the person. Like the Kyo gets treated first, the Jitsu gets treated second, and just in this particular way. Or five elements, it's the water element or the wood element is either overactive or underactive. Now, again, all these ideas and ways of approaching the treatment can be very useful and very effective. But what I'm talking about is that when I come in contact with practitioners and different course studies, I find that this original way that I learned from my teachers, Shizuko Yamamoto, Ohashi, Masunaga, Michio Kushi, Bowen Lee, they all had this idea about addressing the chi, the overall body chi, and all the other things, the more specifics, came after that. They were dealing, in a sense, with the whole body, which is the primitive life force. And life force is something that flows from the very beginning of our conception. So it's the most primitive part of how we are and who we are and how our body functions and how high or low our vitality is. So diagnostically, we could look at the person, and I think it's very, how would you say, obvious that you look at a person and you can see, is this person, do they look like they have vitality or do they look like they're lacking vitality? And this is a starting point. Then we can also see the person in different positions, like the prone position. Take a short break here. And when we start to work, one of the most important things that we can do is to make contact with the person, and not as a technique or the beginning of a series of techniques with a clinical objective, but just touching in a way that's telling the person that you're connected with them and you want to help them feel better, which is almost always why they come to see you. They want to feel better or continue to feel well. And so your initial touch communicates that. And as you touch and look, you maybe pick up different indications of what's happening. Now, this area, let's say, which is a common area to place your hand to start the treatment. Of course, it could be that you're working in the supine position and touching the hara. But this area here might show different things. And it could be showing the kidneys and the renal system. It can show a lot about the digestive system. If we go down further, we can see a lot about the hormonal system, also into the legs, hormonal. Now, different protocols may interpret these different areas in different ways. Somehow they all work out in the end. So you may have different indications than the one that I just said, but this is how I was introduced to the different meanings of the areas from the teachers that I originally studied with. Um, so we can notice, is there an excess of energy? And I always think of this in a way that it's good news because there's energy here, it's just not circulating. And then I start to think, well, taking into consideration the whole person, whether they're hardy or fragile, um, weak or strong, these kind of descriptive ideas, then we can apply a technique, one of the techniques, in order to help that chi, which may be stuck in this area. There's plenty of it, but it's not circulating. And we can work with different ideas. Now, I've presented these different ideas in a comprehensive course called Techniques of the Masters. There's
When
so many variations and so many different ideas. Yes,
when you say it's not circulating or feels like there's too much energy in the area, are you getting that from looking at her body or from the touch?
that's both. Yeah, you get it from a combination of both, or it could be either. But anyway, you have something to work with. It's like a sculptor. He has the clay there. Now he has to work with it. And the person has energy, and now your instincts are telling you that it would be really helpful if you could help her get it to circulate. So many different traditional techniques would be useful. If it's, again, energy that's there but stagnated, you could use something like a vibrating technique, or you could call it a dispersing technique. It's very helpful to work with the breath. And I know a lot of people do work with the breath, but also this is an idea that sometimes is not used, I think, often enough, because the breath assists whatever you're trying to do energetically. So start to use the breath strategically in your treatments. So as an example, I would have her breathe in, and then she breathes out. Now you could say, well, it's a vibrating technique. Energetically, it's dispersing. It's helping to circulate. It's helping to, if you're thinking about it as the kidney area, breathe in and breathe out. Now, the intensity of what you're doing, of course, is going to be according to who you're treating. Somebody that's more fragile and weak, you may want to do this a lot lighter. Someone that's more hardy, more muscular, breathe in.
So
And you
you're
can
not
get into a rhythm with it. Breathe in and breathe out. Okay, so that's one idea as an example. Now, I think I'll stick with this area because let's say that I perceive more that there's an absence of energy in this area, either here indicating more the digestive system, here the renal and endocrine system. I can use one of these very typical traditional techniques, but not only and I can use this in two ways. One is to stimulate the whole body chi, integration of all the chi, but also at the same time focus it to an area so it helps to gather the chi where my focus is. So say like this, and using the foot also very common in traditional techniques. Breathe in and breathe out. And so I'm lifting the leg, which is bringing the focus to where my foot is. And that's bringing the chi, my intention to that area. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. So compression, whenever you have compression, then you also want to have the opposite, release. So I'm doing some rocking in between. Now, the depth of this stretch, also you have to be sensitive, and I'm sure everyone is, but it's always good to remind yourself. I always remind myself, where is the limit? So a person that's more rigid, you're going to have to be a lot more careful and have less expectation of the range of movement that you're going to make with this stretch. So breathe in and breathe out, and you find that limit and you kind of ease into it. Breathe in and breathe out.
I've noticed in classes that sometimes, especially new practitioners,
Breathe in
a technique like that
and breathe out.
has a lot of different parts to it, and they get so hung up on exactly where to put their hands or their feet that then they don't try the technique. It seems like you're pretty flexible about how you're approaching it.
Well, the body has mechanics to it as well. I don't usually only think of it as a mechanical entity, but the joints and the muscles have a mechanical component to them. And so that way of focusing, when I'm bringing the leg up, I'm also feeling this movement coming to the area where my foot is located. So this is gathering chi. For me, that's a way to do it. Now I could go and bring the focus here over the hip joint and on the gluteus muscle. This is more the reproductive system. And when I do the same stretch, breathe in, and it's always good to make the stretch on the out breath, this stretch anyway. The focus now is going to a different area. So it's a general whole body movement of chi, but also depending on your focus and how you maybe move your foot or your hands, it's going to move where is this focal point from the technique. And then you have the intensity level. Are you going to use more strong application or more light application? And this is something that you pick up the vitality of the person, um, the flexibility of the person, very important. And just as a side note, I found that in the last 20 years that progressively people are becoming less flexible. And a lack of flexibility is also in a way infiltrating to younger age groups. So it's just something to be aware of. And we live in a convenience culture, which means less body movement, more stagnation, less flexibility. So it's just a heads up that using a technique like that, I know that my demo model here is able to receive that kind of intensity. Somebody that's older, more fragile, more frail, I certainly would go a lot easier. So that's a couple of ideas about using these kind of techniques. And if we compare that with the idea of treating a meridian, it's meditative, it's very methodical. But most of the time when we're treating meridian, we're not moving, but we could also incorporate that to meridian treatment before, almost like a preparation. The tissue, the muscle, the meridians, all the meridians, creating movement, and then focusing that movement to the area of the meridian. So we can intersperse these techniques very actively with meridian treatment. I mentioned before that I think that the overwhelming tendency of Shiatsu practice, actually since back in the 1980s, became or was revolving around meridian diagnosis and meridian treatment. And as that became more the standard, that a lot of this traditional ideas of moving chi and working in a primitive way and capturing the spirit and the intentions and the movement in nature, all these kind of ideas kind of took a back seat or just got deleted altogether. And they are the heart, really, of the practice as it was in the beginning. All right, so those are a couple ideas that we can do in prone. Now I'm going to have my wonderful demo model turn on the back. If she's still awake or alive, then scoot down just a hair. Now, all these techniques that I'm showing right now also have many, many variations. And those variations are really determined by your objectives in the treatment and the condition of the person. And, you know, when we first learn how to practice, we kind of practice in a neutral way. And as we gain experience, we start to be able to zero in, become more defined in how we approach each person, more unique in how each person is treated. So I'll just quickly show an idea with the neck and the shoulders, because a lot of times people get kind of stressed in that area. Emotionally, when they're under stress, they tend to collapse up here in the neck and the shoulders. A lot of our postural influences in our culture, driving the way that we sit, computers, cause the shoulders to migrate forward and get stuck in a misaligned forward direction. This all compresses the head, the neck, the blood flow to the brain, and many different ramifications of that. So again, any technique that you learn has built in a lot of variations. So most people know this stretch. And classically, if we're stretching like this, that's what we can do. Or we can release the stretch and then work with the neck. And we can work with the neck structurally. A lot of the original Shiatsu practitioners also were using different types of structural techniques, which in a way you could say are Western osteopath or chiropractic techniques, but you really find them in all cultures. In ancient Greece, they called them the bone setters, as an example. But in China and Japan, it's just natural to move the body in certain ways. And when you do that, bones, muscles, and tissue are reacting similar, no matter what century we're in, what part of the world we're in. Anyway, a lot of times I find that I want to keep the stretch and work on either the structure, the tissue, or the meridian. And there's quite a few meridians running through the neck. In a way, when we stretch, we influence a lot of those meridians, if not all of them. And we can also determine which meridian we're stretching by the position of the head. So we can keep the head in a neutral position and stretch. We can turn and stretch, and we're going to get more stretching action more toward the back as we move the head more in rotation. And if I wanted to work on the neck, while I keep the stretch, because we're working on the floor, traditionally, we can stretch like this, and that leaves our hand free to work meridian, muscle, bone structure. And intermittently, we can move energy, disperse energy. And also areas that when we look at the body, we can see that that area lacks movement. We can see that when the person walks. A lot of times they're walking, but like one of their hips or one of their knees or their shoulders are not quite in the same rhythm with the rest of the body. It's just like hanging there or immobile. So we get these clues that certain areas of the body lack movement. So we could also employ this kind of technique to introduce movement. And if you take a look, it's not only at the shoulder, but it's going all the way down the side of the body, all throughout the body. Her feet are moving. So it's a good way to disperse or integrate. It's a good way to introduce movement or just maintain a stretch, which is opening up the area that you're stretching. So we can find different ways to do those type of things. Anyway, we can go on and on. You can look in the old books if they're still available. So old videos that you can find online. And we have a very comprehensive program that we offer called Techniques of the Masters. But I think that actually all body workers, not just Shiatsu practitioners, should incorporate these chi moving ideas, and it will upgrade the results of the practice. So even though we're taking a step back into the primitive level, we're adding a component that's very basic, and it's a building block to everything else that goes on in the system. So we're really encouraging people to take a look at those basics. And we find in any kind of healing technique, any kind of body work, any kind of energy work or energy development, that you can learn new things, you can work with intermediate or advanced techniques, but it's always good to go back to the basics. And after you've gone into intermediate or advanced techniques, when you go back to the basics, you find out actually these techniques are not that basic, because now you notice that it depends more on who's using it rather than the technique itself. And as I mentioned earlier, the intention determines the outcome. And as you get more practice and more experience, you learn to set your intention and keep that intention steady throughout your sessions. Sessions are like events. When you get into it from this kind of thinking and this kind of feeling, it's like an event with the client. And that really animates it. That adds a whole extra quality of potential and to the changing of the chi flow. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say today about techniques of the masters, and how, all throughout these years, um, it's always inspired me to go back and look at those techniques. And when I do, I remember the teachers and remember standing there when Masunaga showed something, or when Bowen Lee, who is not that well known, but he was really a great master of body work and yoga. And it was really interesting because one time I was working with him at a summer camp, and I went down to the lake, and there was Bowen Lee in a rowboat rowing around the lake 5, 6, 7, 10 times. And you could just see that he was like working to maintain and build his own chi. The original teachers always were recommending to commune with nature to really learn how chi flows, how chi feels, how chi works. So we would love to have any comments in our comments section. You have to subscribe if you want to write something. We would love to hear from you in terms of your reaction to what we're talking about here and your own experiences, your own techniques. There's endless amount of techniques with all the variations. And I think I'll call it a day unless Lynn wants to add something to that.
Well, two things. It's interesting to me, students in the Shiatsu program at the school up the road from us, often one of their first challenges during their training is remembering all the meridians, all the points, and all the 5-element theory. And they sometimes get so mentally caught up in that they're almost frozen in order to actually do treatment. And incorporating some of this more general movement work and this idea of, in a more general diagnostic way of just moving energy in the body, can help free people up from worrying about. It's not like we don't want to learn all the meridians and the points, but to make this a part of it, part of your treatments from the beginning, can help. And then you can learn the other parts slowly, but maybe help some of that overwhelm, remembering all the concepts and all the details. Margie just commented, I love the idea you're reinforcing about working with the whole body. It makes her feel more creative and open to explore. Actually, she's one of the people I was thinking of that, yeah, seems to be a bit of a theme that I've been noticing over the last 2 years in the classes. And the other thing I wanted to mention, anyone on the live stream, if you're not on our mailing list, you can get a course called Techniques of the Masters. It's an online course that Saul made years ago now, but it's still a wonderful resource. It has over 40 techniques shown in detail through videos so that you can review them again and again. And also some more going into some of this theory and concepts of how the original masters practiced this art. And so if you're curious about that, want to look into it, there's a link in the description.
All right, so I guess we'll sign off now. And thanks to everybody for showing up today, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thanks to our model, Morna, and I hope that she got something out of the demos as well.